Welcome back to Mysterious Goings On. This is Alex. Really excited to continue speaking with someone about how creativity informs not only their career, but their success in their career. I'm joined today by Bob Martin, who is one of the partners who created a very unique co-working concept here in Kansas City. Beyond that, though, Bob has a great resume of wonderful work he's done, not only in a creative fashion for himself and his career, but also marketing and consulting with creative people. So welcome to Mysterious Goings On, Bob Martin.
Alex, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
It's my pleasure to have you back as a friend, because we go to coffee every now and again, and I enjoy speaking with you. And I remember sitting with you. And by the way, we were sitting here at one of your locations for iWorks, and that's IWERX, here in Gladstone. And he's got a studio here that is very enviable. It's wonderful. But we had coffee here a few months back, or we had coffee over next door, and came over here, and you gave me a tour, and I was absolutely blown away. And then I rolled up today, folks. And no kidding, parking lot's full. I had to wait for a lady to back out so I could get in. Now, I'm not saying you could never park here. Don't get the wrong idea. It's just a really, really busy day here, huh?
Well, that's kind of you, Alex. Yeah, we've been blessed, and it is Taco Tuesday. So, we got margaritas right in our backyard, and they show up for those $1 tacos or whatever they have to offer over there. But we've been very blessed here. We're very excited about our community that we have here at iWorks in Gladstone, and also iWorks down in North Kansas City. And hopefully we can continue to help small business grow in that capacity.
And we'll get more into iWorks in just a moment. But I do want to ask you, while it's on the tip of my brain here, Sure. When did iWorks start?
We opened our first facility in North Kansas City in October of 2016.
And now how many locations do you have now?
We're ready to open our fourth location actually here within the week. So we'll have 4 open within about a 4-year period.
And you're so busy, and you took time to sit down with me, man. I so appreciate this. Thank you. Folks, if you're in the Kansas City area, I can just tell you that these iWorks locations, they're all unique, they're all different, but they have a great vibe. That's the thing you have in common. It's a really welcoming business vibe, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit, Bob, about your life and your career and kind of the creative angles. I first met you at least a decade ago when I was working for an event firm and doing some PR, and you were general manager of the Kansas City Radio Disney.
I was managing a couple radio stations for the Walt Disney Company. That's correct.
Now, did you have a radio background?
0. I never had a radio background. It's interesting enough. I kept bouncing up alongside Disney most of my career. For a while, we were a vendor that sold products to Disney that was actually sold in one of their stores on Main Street, and that got us into doing some training for the product into Disney. My kids, when we were younger and lived in the Philadelphia area, were introduced to Radio Disney, so I was familiar with the format from there. And in fact, I had relocated from Northern California back to Kansas City, my wife's hometown, and I had hired a headhunter to find a job for me. And there was a listing for this particular job with Disney. I applied for the job, but I went so far as to tell the headhunter not to bother following up because I was just confident that there was no way I was going to get offered the job. And about 3 weeks later, there I was working for the Walt Disney Company here in Kansas City.
Now, I took the Disney leadership course years ago. I mean, there is a definite Disney vibe. Now, I understand this is Disney Radio. This is not exactly the same thing, but you are a unit of Disney. Did you have to do things the Disney way?
Oh, yeah. There were very strict brand constraints and rules and regulations that we had, and particularly because Radio Disney was marketing itself to tweens and younger children, and the Disney Company was positioning itself at the forefront in sensibilities to marketing to kids.
Right.
We were sitting at the head of that table. It was very defined what we could and couldn't do. We basically could not advertise food products because we had a food guideline that any food product had to meet for us to market. We couldn't obviously market anything that had to do with beer or liquor or fireworks or firearms or things like that.
No cigarettes or anything? No cigars?
No cigarettes. We didn't do that. We couldn't get the American Royal Barbecue on air. I couldn't run ads for that because it was barbecue, and that didn't pass our food guideline. Now, eventually we got some clearance on events that had things like barbecue in it, but you weren't going to see the Budweiser 600 being advertised on Radio Disney.
We'll talk about having to employ some creativity to make your ad revenue goals, right? I mean, it sounds like really challenging, huh?
Yeah, that's right. The upside was, of course, with the Disney brand and the other assets that we had, talking about Disney properties and things that were coming out of Hollywood Records, and the ability to bring promotions that were wrapped around Disney properties to local businesses. as long as we worked within the rules, we really had some powerhouse opportunities for local marketers.
I recall that the vibe there was really exceptional, and of course, I used to be in radio a little bit. I hosted a talk show and put this gift of gab to work, I guess. But I remember it being like you'll laugh at this, kind of a kinder, gentler environment for radio. And you're like laughing. You're already smiling big. You're like, Alex, you have no idea. But the vibe was certainly different than any station I'd been in.
Sure. I mean, it was pristine content. It was going through a filter before you got it, so there was nothing that was off color or even PG-13. I mean, this was strictly for family fare, and but we saw Hannah Montana grow up, and we saw Selena Gomez. I actually drove around the front of my car for an event that we did with Sporting Kansas City, and we had the Jonas Brothers. I tried to sell a promotion with the Jonas Brothers for $2,500, and somebody thought, one of the local sports teams, I won't mention who, thought $2,500 was outrageous for a group they'd never heard of, and look where the Jonas Brothers are now. Yeah, so it was. I think a kinder, gentler content is absolutely accurate, and I will say uplifting and positive, and the things that you expect out of a Disney brand.
Prior to that, you've had a career in marketing that's just been really interesting.
Yeah, I've had a fun life. I spent the better part of a decade working in sports marketing, so I worked with Hall of Fame athletes. I used to joke because I would go in and talk about what I did to my children's classmates, and even when they were in high school, and I was talking about people like Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams that I worked with, and Rod Carew and Wayne Gretzky, and these kids' eyes were just glassed over. They had never heard of these people, so I realized I had aged somewhat. But I had a really good time doing that. We were licensed by the all the 4 major sports, and again with those constraints, you figure out how to be creative and operate within the licenses and the rights that you have to use these likenesses and these trademarks. And so on top of that, it was a great gig. It was I've always been a big fan of small business, and that's what this was. This was a startup. I was the number 3 employee. We built it up, and we sold it. We were in Huntington Beach, California. We sold it to a company out of Philadelphia. I tell people the height of my sales career was when I convinced my wife that South Jersey was the same as Southern California. So we went off and we went in that direction. My dad thought the only way the job could have been better if we'd had a beer tap in my office, and so I tried to make that happen. But it was a real good run, a real enjoyable time. And after that, I went to work for. I was in charge of marketing for the Thomas Kinkade Company, the famous painter of light, and did that for a couple of years. And that was a real interesting sociological experience. It was an experiment and experience.
Really?
But and so I had some really great opportunities there. I got to work with the Lights of 60 Minutes. We did a program with them that Mike Wallace was doing the interviews with Tom, and Mike Wallace is a big traditional American artist, so he was just lobbing up softballs, and Tom was putting them out of the park, and we cued it so that the 60 Minutes episode ran right after we got Tom to be on the board of directors with the Salvation Army, and so he broke open the kettlebell ringing that particular Thanksgiving on the Dallas Cowboys football show, and 3 nights later we had him on the 60 Minutes episode, and that following week our sales were just through the roof. So it was a real marketing coup, but it was a good time, and left there and started my own company, and did some fun things with that. And then in 2005, that was still in Northern California. We were working with Thomas in a small town called Morgan Hill, California, just south of San Jose. And then we moved back here into the Kansas City area in 2005. Been here since.
So this is interesting to me on a creative level. You went from sports marketing to art marketing. I mean, was there a big difference? You know what I mean? Was it widgets versus widgets? Was it leveraging a brand is the same thing no matter where it's from?
Not too much, because most of the products that we were creating in the art community, in the sports community, were artistically related, so lithographs and figurines and things of that nature that replicated these artists. And I also worked for the M.I. Hummel Company. If some of the older congregation might be listening.
The figurines.
That was the one by the famous nun in Germany. And so I made a whole career really out of marketing things that people have absolutely no need for. So in that way, much of it was the same. The thing I think I learned from a little bit from M.I. Hummel, but certainly from the sports world, and then translated specifically to the arts world with Tom, is that it's really easy to market something when there's a story attached to it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that coming over here today, is that, the really strong businesses have two things. They have a good business foundation and they have a great story.
Yeah.
And when those two are aligned or can intertwine, it's amazing what can happen. And so that helped, obviously, with the sports marketing and the athletes. They've all created their own stories. They have had their careers, they're Hall of Famers. They've had moments within those Hall of Fame careers that stand out. I think about Ted Williams hitting a home run in his last at bat, and I was a Roberto Clemente fan of his tragic death. We just saw it recently with Kobe Bryant, and we're seeing all the highlights in his career, but with an understanding that we all are sort of mortal. But when you have these stories that you can tell that resonate with consumers, it's so much easier to market. And honestly, I'll say that when you have constraints, it's easier to market. It defines parameters. I have a joke as a journalist by education. No writer can write without a deadline. And I think
100%.
I think that's true with creatives. I work with a lot of artists, and my grandmother was an artist of some renown, and I just saw her, and if she could take forever on a project if there wasn't like this time limit. So,
Right.
But when there was a time limit, and she knew sizes, and she did a big backdrop for the Globe Theater in Minnesota for a Shakespearean play. I don't recall which one it was, but it was a triptych that she had to do that was about 16 feet tall and about 8 feet wide each panel. And she had a deadline on that, and it was fantastic. The stuff that she put out for that particular project was fantastic. But if she had an art show coming up, it was the day before the art show. She was cranking out 5 or 6 new pieces.
I love that though about the deadline, and that's something we can all, whether you're artistic or creative in general, we all need our deadlines. But that is so true. I'm also, just like you, former journalism, got that background. Yeah, that's true. I mean, if they said, well, I got a feature, it's due in a week or so, well, I got started on that feature about 2 days out, maybe, it just happens.
Certainly I wouldn't cast aspersions because I'm as indictable as anyone. But it is kind of a shame, and I think that's where the great ones get their greatness, is that I don't know that they still take advantage of the time that they're allotted to do these projects, but in that last hour, what they put out is just inspiring.
It really is. It really is. Did you ever have to develop or did it come naturally to you, would you say, or did you have to develop kind of an internal strategy for doing the kind of work you did, or was it just like, no, it's just the way you do it? Did you have something inside you that you had to pull out every now and then to make it happen?
I will say that I was blessed with an ear for the language. When I look back now, and Lord knows it was raw, but I could write. I could conjugate a verb. And so then I figured out a routine to honing that, and the routine was no secret. You just write, right? And then maybe you read some as well as write. And so I refined that, and going into marketing from being a journalist was relatively easy at the time because we're talking about in the early 80s, marketing was still art. I would argue that today it's science.
I would agree.
And so the marketing is foundational to communication.
Yeah.
Right? We're trying to influence people's behaviors, but at the same time, the only way we can do that is by communicating what it is we're trying to communicate, whether it's a product's benefits and features, or whether it's the story that we're telling behind it, or wherever the case may be.
You just led me right into my next question. Now, you have the marketing background. We both have the journalism. Let's just start there. This is where I'm finding our common ground. By the way, that's an effective PR technique. All right. Our common ground. We're journalists by trade or by training.
Right.
You went to the one side, the marketing side. I went to
the dark side.
But I went even darker. I went to public relations, right? To some people's estimation. But I'm seeing this, and you feel free to call BS on this if you don't agree. I'm just a little older than you. I'm just kidding, just a little. I'm only a year or two younger than you, maybe. But I remember that about 20 years ago when I really started noticing that the space between PR and marketing really started to become, it diminished. And I'm almost to the point now where I think that it's overlapping. And maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
No, I think that's right. I think that, you've had several client experiences, I'm sure, where they think advertising is marketing, and they want to know why they're not running your ads. And I've heard pretty much all of those things, which is my way of buying time to give you some pithy answer to your question. Because basically, I totally agree with you. The way I used to look at marketing is that we were attached at the hip with sales. Mm-hmm. And so marketing was a tool to drive sales. PR was a tool to maintain awareness, and I think we've crossed over those lines.
Yeah.
And, we look at content marketing, and you look at what in our world I like to call the AEC. This idea of building an audience, then engaging it, then converting it, and so marketing and PR play roles in that. And then where does social media play? I contend it's not a strategy; it's a medium.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you use a strategy and employ that medium? Others disagree with me, and I'm not sure that any of us are wrong or right, but I think that there's plenty of room for discussion on that. So again, the short answer to your question is yes. I think marketing and PR have become much more diluted.
Because your quip earlier, though, I do have clients who come to me and said, and I have to just gently say, look, if you want a guaranteed placement, buy an ad. Oh, no, I want PR because PR is more valued. Exactly. Why? Because you don't necessarily pay for it. It's hard to make that. And I understand because I'm not annoyed with clients who feel that way, and I don't look down on them like, oh, you idiot, because it is so blurred nowadays. There's a lot of PR firms that are strictly play for pay or pay for play, that too. And there's a lot of them that really act like and walk the walk and talk the talk like marketing firms. So I understand why people get confused.
Yeah, I think, but with the generation of proprietary content, I mean, if you write a blog, is that PR? Is that marketing? Because the idea behind PR always was, to your point, was that getting an independent authority to validate my story by publishing it in some renowned publication or delivering it to this huge audience was what PR did. If I write a blog and I've got 2,000 followers and 60% of them read my blog, is that marketing? Is that PR? So again, going back to your question, I definitely see that those lines have blurred.
Well, I did inbound marketing as an agency for a couple of years, and I realized that I probably didn't need to subscribe to some franchise thing because I was doing it anyway. I just thought I'd get all fancy and do it through a franchise, which I learned my lesson. Yeah, it's like, hey, dummy, you've been doing it anyway. But inbound marketing, though, where you're pulling people in, instead of broadcasting, if you're not familiar with the term, folks, I know Bob is, but instead of broadcasting to everybody, you're more narrowcasting because you're pulling people in by offering credible, free information that helps people do their jobs.
Right.
That's interesting to me. And you also do consulting and have done consulting in marketing.
That's correct.
Can you give me a flavor of what type? Are there certain sectors you work in?
Most of my clients are small businesses. When I say small businesses, 50 million or less in dollars, in terms of dollars. And I enjoy that. And I found a strategy that works for me. I don't work with a lot of clients at any given time. In fact, I have one right now. I probably rarely have more than one. And I happened on this strategy about 15 years ago when we were living in Northern California. And people will come in and ask me to help them with their marketing. And there's some pretty consistent restraints, but I agreed to do that. And we spent about 90 days working on a marketing plan. And then I hand it over to them, and I tell them I will either execute on the plan or they can go in their different direction. And of course, the 90 minutes or the 90 days gives us both a chance to figure out if we can work with each other. And more times than not, they hire me because by then we've identified the fact that we can work together and we know what the strategy is going to be. And so my work tends to be somewhat marketing related with my clients, but generally what happens is it's more business management. So a lot of the times, some of the biggest challenges I see is these small businesses don't know. They don't track, they don't record, they don't document. And so I went and saw a client a couple of years ago and had a very nice conversation with him. And we were talking about the close ratio for his salespeople. And he was pretty confident that his close ratio was around 40%, which I thought was really good. Well, after 2 years of tracking, we later discovered that his close ratio was about 20%. And it was probably lower than that because there were a lot of clients and prospects that were not getting captured in his CRM or in his proposal documentation. And so it didn't make a world of difference to his business. In fact, his business has grown by, it's almost doubled in 3 years. But what it does do, it gives you a place to focus and a place to identify your creative needs.
Yeah. You said something interesting. We have this in common as well. You do kind of a short term at first to see if we can work together, a 90-day kind of test out, and it's mutual, right? If you don't like me, I don't like you, and I don't mean like, but you know what I mean. If it's not a good fit for either of us, we shake hands and move on, or is that how it is, or what are you describing?
Yeah, no, so going back to your earlier comment about age, I'm just at the point in my life where I want to work with people that are satisfying to work with, that it's enjoyable, right? And am I independently wealthy? No, I'm not. So I certainly need the retainers, but I want to have fun. I want to go have fun with these people, and you know, having fun is not relegated to a particular industry or trade. You know, it's all about the people. Do you
Right.
like working with these people?
Yeah, well, life's too short. I say that all. Who doesn't? I mean,
That's right.
a lot of people say it, but a lot of people don't either have the wherewithal to. And I don't mean, like you say, I don't mean wherewithal, but they just don't have the wherewithal to live that way.
Right.
You know, but you choose to, and I think that's another thing that I've seen in you for years. And I actually, and I'm embarrassing him, but I looked up to you about that. I've seen how you. The moment I met you and observed how you operated at Disney, and then watched you go, and I mean, you're a guy who, and if I'm making over dramatic, you will correct me. I know you will. But you know, at Disney, they started changing how they did operations, so you moved on from there. And I didn't know for sure what you were going to do, but you were at a guy at a time in your life when it could have been really, really difficult to do that. But you reinvented yourself and did something new. And you're embarrassed, I can tell. But I mean, isn't that kind of what happened here?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. First of all, you're very kind in your compliments, and I appreciate them very
Well,
greatly.
it's no BS. I'm not blowing smoke.
I understand that. It was interesting when Radio Disney decided to shut down their Kansas City operation. It was in February of 2013, and it was a great time in my life because it was the one time in my life where I had two kids in college, and so the timing was good. My oldest in college had just fractured his leg, so we needed the insurance.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the next 2 or 3 years were tough. They were real tough. But I made a commitment to my wife, which did not go over really well, that I was no longer going to go to work for anybody else. I had been dismissed or let go or fired, whatever word you want to use, on 6 different occasions. I got a whole array of business cards I can show you.
Wow.
And part of it was working at some of the highest levels in these executive suites, and particularly in marketing. I think the national average last I saw is for a vice president of marketing is about 22 months.
Yeah, that sounds right.
For a job. You know, so as soon as you walk in those jobs, you've got a target on your back. And at that point in my career, so we're talking about my early 40s, late 30s into my mid 50s, I loved it. I loved that energy. I loved that enthusiasm. I loved the challenge. In most of the places I went, I felt like I could make a difference. I wanted to sit at the table where we could influence the direction of the companies. But after the Disney thing ended, I was no longer interested in going back into that arena. I was also not interested in moving, and that had been part of my ability was I was willing to take a job pretty much any place in the country. But we were here. My wife's parents are still with us, but they needed some help here in Kansas City. My family's all in St. Louis, and there were some health challenges there, and I just wanted to be around family. And so we elected to stay. And I have a theory that entrepreneurism is a genetic trait. In fact, there are some schools that are looking to study it. And I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I do believe that if you grew up in an entrepreneurial-minded household, that you have some intuitive inclinations as to how to run a business and what it means. And both my grandfathers owned their own businesses. My grandmother was an independent artist. My dad was a college educator, but he always had a side gig going. Both my mother and father were both educators. One of their laments is that we don't teach our own children our own economic system. Talk about capitalism.
Oh, of course.
And so, but I grew up with that understanding, and fortunately I had a good philosophical bent that I've always been a guy with the glasses half full kind of guy. And I just think life is too short to not think that way. And so the reinvention was always a cause of circumstances because a lot of it was unintentional. But what was intentional, and Kelly and I had started, my wife Kelly and I had started our own company in Northern California, was I was going to go back to running our own business and making a go of it here. It was funny because when I announced that to her, she goes, "No, you're really just in between jobs, right? This is not really a thing." I go, "No, remember in California when we worked together? It was such a good time." And she goes, "Yeah, I don't remember it that way."
I worked with my wife for just less than a year. She left Sprint after 18 years, something like that. And she's like, "I'm going to relax for the first time in 23 years of working," or whatever it was. And I was like, "Fine." And then I was like, I do run a PR firm. And she was made vice president. You know what? Here's the deal, though, Bob. We had a great time together. She was kind of the yin to my yang. She did things. I'm pretty good at the one side of it, and she's more conservative and good at the other side. So I can bring in the clients. I can make them happy. I can do all that stuff, and I'm fairly creative. She's like, "I'm going to take care of business. I'm going to make sure all the timelines
Sure.
met. So it was a really great thing. But then after about 9 months, she's like, okay, well, I've got an offer somewhere else. It's been great. And then, I was like, oh, damn.
Yeah, it's never good when your spouse is out looking for a job and you don't know about it. She's helping you out.
Well, that's interesting. So that led you to, how did that get to you to iWorks? I want to get into the co-working space.
Sure. I had a client when I was at Disney, and he was working in the banking industry here, and he had left the banking industry, and I was available, and we had reconnected, and we had this idea for helping encore entrepreneurs, people who were 55 and above that wanted to start their own businesses, and the numbers are pretty impressive in terms of the number of folks that are of that age that are interested in starting their own businesses. Part of them out of necessity, which is kind of my case, and part of them out of design. They've reached a financial situation where they can step away from their jobs and pursue a passion or a dream, and we saw an opportunity for supporting them. And so we did that. In part of our planning, we thought that a good thing to do, and we looked at it probably 4 or 5 years down the road, was we would build a business incubator that would support encore entrepreneurs, to use the phrase that the Coffin Foundation goes. And we consulted with a couple of our ad hoc advisors, and they told us about an initiative that was going on in North Kansas City to open a business incubator and co-working space as well. I was familiar with the technology and the infrastructure in North Kansas City from a startup that I had been involved in during this transition, and I knew that they had 10 gig of high-speed band internet bandwidth. I can't think of the word right now. And a lot of dark fiber and stuff like that. And I said, this is the place to go. So we went up and I told essentially the story I just told you, only with a little more eloquence. And it was in a think tank up there, and two guys, both named John Miller, one is the father and one is the son, had a sort of a shepherd hooks out and pulled us aside, and we told them what we were thinking, and they told us what we were thinking, and there was a symbiosis there. And so we put together, the original plan was to build a 10,000 square foot co-working space that morphed into a 34,000 square foot co-working space. Oh. And we got that one. That took about 2 years to get online. We said we'd never do that again. And then we went up to Gladstone and literally built one that's 32,000 square feet. So I've learned to never say ever. But hope to answer the question. That's how iWorks came into being. I've always, like I said earlier, I've always loved small businesses. And when I was just cutting my teeth in journalism in Southern California, in the LA market, was doing a lot of freelance writing, and that's what I was doing. I was doing business writing and stories on small startups, and of course, it's a great place there's millions of startups there you could talk about, but companies that grew into major brands that we know now. And so I've always had that affinity for the small businesses, and that's what I love about this. That's every day I come to work, it's different, but these people starting their own companies and trying to make a go of it are so upbeat and fun to be around, and Lord knows they have their challenges, and they go through the trough of despair, and sometimes you're a cheerleader, and sometimes you're a consultant, and sometimes you're a financier, but you do what you got to do, and you know that these people can make a difference because they're out there, they're doing their thing, and they're fulfilling their dreams, and hopefully they create jobs and really make the economy go.
Kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier about everybody has, if a brand has a good story, it sounds to me like just the adversity of gutting it out. A lot of your clients that come here, they all have these most of them have these really interesting stories. Would you say that's fair enough?
Yes, absolutely. You're spot on. And we've got some people that are in the professional services industry, but understanding how they got to where they got is always intriguing, and there's these universal themes, and so it's really interesting. I just a side story on stories. Mm-hmm. The iWorks name was probably one of the easiest naming exercises I've ever gone through. I don't know, it just came to me, but it also has a Disney connection because iWorks really is kind of on a triumvirate of ideas. One is iWorks, so the solopreneur who's starting their own business, right. And then works from the German word for a production facility, so you're creating things. Right. But then there was a gentleman named iWorks who was a contemporary of Walt Disney, right. And he worked here in Kansas City and helped generate the early precursors to Mickey Mouse, and then him and Walt had a love-hate relationship, and they went to LA together, and they built independent studios, worked together, did all this different stuff. So The iWorks name is also a nod to Kansas City's creative and innovative past.
I thought I knew a little bit about Disney. So they diverged to a point. Is it this other person, the iWorks person, kind of
UB.
So did kind of fade into obscurity, or I'm just ignorant? I guess I've never heard of this guy.
He had a pretty good livelihood with his own independent studio, and I don't know how many times he and Walt split and got back together. A couple of occasions. I do know that UB's son and daughter stayed very active in the motion picture industry. I certainly could be corrected on this. His daughter was operating a studio and a management company up out in New York. His daughter was in New York. His son was still in A. One of them has won an Academy Award, and I don't know which. I can't recall which one now. So the family has stayed in the industry, but I wouldn't say he went in obscurity, but certainly, Walt had the better end of it.
Yeah. Well, it's Simon and Garfunkel, right? Paul and Oates,
Yeah.
It's
like when I introduced my wife and I go, "This is Kelly and I'm Ann Bob."
So tell me a little bit, if you would, and I got a couple of questions about co-working in general.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm gonna throw these at you, and I'm kind of really curious to see what you're gonna say. When I first heard about co-working a few years ago, I thought, well, this is the fad of the month. It's not gonna last. People are gonna go, but then they're gonna be, they're not gonna do it. But here we are. This has been going on. How long has co-working really been going? 10 good years, right?
About
Maybe
13.
13?
People that really track it are looking back at 2006 is really when it started to germinate.
So do you think that the crash in 2008 enhanced the fortunes of co-working in general?
I don't know, and we discussed that a lot because obviously we're in a tremendous period of economic growth in the country. We're going what are we into 11 years now, I think, but we're always looking at thunderclouds, right? It's not that we're pessimistic; it's just that we want to be realistic.
Yeah.
And one of my partners believes very strongly that a downtick in the economy will actually help us. That people will have a need or an inclination to start their own businesses.
Right.
We don't worry about it too much because we have 78 offices in Gladstone. We've got 38 in North Kansas City. We're not looking for a very big market share. There's some things that we've learned in the process that I think have made a difference for us and will make a difference for us long term. But I don't know what impact I would say it probably spurred it because we've seen nothing but growth in the co-working space since 2006.
See, that's what I was getting at. Is I'm wondering because, and here's from my own journey here. I started this is our 10th year in business. I started out in the house, then within a couple of years, rented space, had an office space. Found after about 4 years of that clients had virtually no use for it. I rarely entertained anybody at the office space, and I had 3 different spaces around town. And then I decided finally, why am I putting out $1,500 a month or $1,000 a month for which some people in parts of the world are going, that's it? But hey, for me, that's a lot. So I got away from it. And then I got through one of my credit cards a membership to the infamous WeWork, which we have in this market as well.
That's correct.
They're interesting. If people don't know the WeWork story, Google it. There's a lot going on with that. The way they're capitalized and all this stuff here. And I know Bob's not here to comment too much on WeWork, but I just wonder, though, you guys seem to be kind of managing a steady pace. You're not offering the moon. You've got a lot of nice amenities here. I think it's comparable to the WeWork spaces I've been in. How do you feel about that? Do you view them as even as competition, or are you just focused more on this area?
I think as we look at WeWork as an industry partner, there's a lot to be learned from WeWork. One of the things, when WeWork went out to float a bond about a year and a half ago, they had to release their financials. It was the first real look at what I thought was a good barometer of what's going on in an industry. We're otherwise very fragmented. There's only a couple big players, and the rest of the operators are much like us. We're operating 2, 3, 4 spaces locally.
Right.
So we can learn a lot from WeWork, and we have some definite differences in our business model from WeWork, and I don't know that that's good or bad. I think WeWork is going to go through a shift now because of the new ownership and the new leadership that it has. And, I don't wish them any ill will, and in fact, I think their challenges that they're going through are not good for the industry as a whole because it's sort of the antithesis to that old adage, how's it go, high tides raise all boats.
Right.
You think an old Navy guy would remember that one.
Yeah.
But it's the same that goes through when you see an industry leader have challenges, it kind of bruises the industry. Having said that, we're not feeling any fallout from that. I guess if we were optimist, we would think that if WeWork fails, there'll be people that need our offices, but I think we've got our own challenges to face.
Right. And there are other local players in this market. I've been to, I think, all of them now. I've been to events at a lot of them.
Right.
Is it a kind of a friendly
Somebody, Melissa Saubers, who we consider to be the godmother of...
She had a Waldo, right?
Yeah, she had Coworking Waldo, which I think by all historical indicators was the first co-working space. In fact, I interviewed her for a podcast that I did a couple of years ago, and she coined the term co-opetition, right? We're competitors, but we also cooperate. And I will tell you, when we were first building iWorks, people like Gerald Smith, who was the founder of PlexPod, and Melissa, and Herb C., who was the space downtown, they were all very open with us and really gave us some great insights, and a lot of it we followed, and some of it we were lucky to have to follow. And so I think all the local operators, and they can agree or disagree, but I admire what they're doing. Mm-hmm. We learn I learn from them, and to that end, I think it's a real nice community, and we don't see it going anywhere but growing. We thought when we started in 2016 that there would be 60 co-working spaces in Kansas City by the end of 2020, and we're seeing a lot of niche stuff open up, and I think that number is going to be really close.
Oh, really? But it seems to me, and I could be missing it, but it seems like you carve out spaces geographically. I mean, there's not one next door here, right?
No. It's funny because when we used to talk about opening one in North Kansas City, people would say, "Aren't you worried about folks crossing the river?" I go, "Yeah, I'm worried about them not crossing the river." The Northland there's plenty of territory up here. There's plenty of demand in the entire marketplace, and I do think geography has a lot to do with it. Ben Rao's got a place out in Lee's Summit, and I don't know of any other places in Lee's Summit other than the one they're connected with the University of Central Missouri. But I'm confident that he's got to be operating at a pretty high percentage of occupancy because there's just no other competition out there.
Right.
We've got one other space, I think, here, or two other spaces now in the Northland, but we're so disparate from each other. And again, we are certainly square footage-wise, I think only PlexPod Westport is bigger square footage than us. And so we don't think we're that big relative to the demand for office space in the Northland, and so these other players, I'm confident, are faring well as well.
What's the case for co-working? What do you tell people to tour? How do you make the case?
Right. So what we try to do is eliminate challenges to growing a small business. We advocate and we practice, I think, that we're mission based. We want to help small businesses grow. So the case for us is you can come in and look at a space in the morning. You can be operating out of that space in business in the afternoon.
Wow.
And there's no long-term leases. It's month to month. And that we have one price that's everything that includes your internet. We've got, like I said, 10 gig coming in and out of each building. We've got 1 gig hardwired into every office. We've got a printer allocation. So as soon as you come in, we set up a printer driver. You're on our printers. You've got a conference room so that when you look at your office, you can't think of the square footage of your office as your workspace. You think of the square footage of the building outside of the offices as your workspace.
Yeah.
We have other ancillary services, and we're cheerleaders. We want to see you succeed, and it's not just because we're magnanimous. It's just good business.
Yeah.
If you're running a successful business, you're likely to pay your membership fee next month.
Well, okay. Amenities, real quick, and they can go. What's your website so they can go look? By the way.
It's iWorks.org.
And that's
IWERX.org.
.org. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. And you can go check out the amenities. But I'm just strolling around here. You've already mentioned printing, and there's internet. There's coffee, and there's soft drinks and stuff like that. I mean, is that all part of the deal, or do you pay in a certain amount?
No, we're one price. We try not to nickel and dime people. We have, if people want a dedicated IP, we are charged for that. But that's it, and that's like $22 a month.
That's nothing.
The point is, and here in the iWorks Gladstone facility, we've got the podcasting studio that we're in now.
It's very nice.
We're setting up a small video studio here. Oh, right. We've got a writing center that's already opened up here.
Right, that's right.
And then, of course, we've got our sister companies, DesignWorks, that are in the crafts and makerspace. But, it's just, we try to monitor our businesses to find out what they need, and when we can, we respond. And where we can't, we look for alternative solutions, usually opening up our contacts and pointing them in that direction.
Are people bringing their own furniture in too, as well, office furniture?
Oh yeah, was kind of the fun thing. We went over to when we were designing iWorks in North Kansas City. I went over to a place in St. Louis called Cortex, and Cortex has this beautiful co-working space. It's in an old building, so there's some similarities. About 30,000 square feet, so it's a lot the same. And in their facility, you are required to use their furniture. It's just a business decision. I'm not making a judgment on it. Go either way you want to. And we really wrestled with that in terms of how we were going to do it. And then sort of the decision was made for us. Like we opened and we had never decided on it. And people started bringing their own furniture in, and they started making their own offices unique. And it's one of the funnest things to watch people move in and morph these offices into their own environment.
Yeah, they got their own vibe, and they bring it with, which is good because, I mean, that's what you want, right?
Yeah, you got to be comfortable where you work.
Yeah.
My idea of comfort and style and design are entirely different from yours.
Well, I'll tell you what, as we're wrapping up here, and by the way, again, not just because he's a friend of mine, but because these are incredible places. You should check out, if you're in the Kansas City area, if you need a space to work, get you out of the house, or if you want to downsize from having your own large office space that you're renting, please give iWorks a try. It's gorgeous stuff here. You're going to love it. Bob, one last thing. Let's, just as we're wrapping up, do let me know if I forgot anything you wanted to mention. Circling back to marketing, and I love the tip you've already given. I always ask for tips, you know. You've already given a tip, you know, have a story to go with a brand or a product or whatever, a service you're selling, right? Is there anything else, any advice you'd give, not even just to the whippersnappers out there, but to everybody listening who may be working in marketing or just wants some understanding of marketing?
Yeah, I think some real keys, and this is not anything new, but number one, know who your audience is. Who's the audience that's going to buy your product?
Yeah.
And then know how to reach them vis-a-vis what media.
Right.
And then finally, if you're gonna spend money on one of these avenues, and I think that's really what we're talking about here, whether you're bringing in somebody to help you or whether you're going to buy something, make sure that you can buy it so you can have some consistency and some longevity. I have clients who they go out and they spend some money, they do a one-time deal on direct mail, and they don't get any response, and they quit.
Yeah.
Well, until you monitor all the variables, you have to have the financial wherewithal to make sure you can do these, whether it's TV or radio or direct mail or digital marketing, whatever the case may be. Make sure that you've got enough financial wherewithal that you can spread it out over. I would say if you're going to think about anything less than 90 days, you're probably not going to find out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I've seen that in my career too, and it's a shame because we did years ago. I did a direct mail piece for a guy who's involved in remodeling, and we had a whole campaign. We got the first one out, and it went to several zip codes, and he said, "Well, this just went out 3 days ago. I haven't had a single call. It's a failure." He fired us. And I was just like, well, buddy, I'm sorry. But it gets to what you're saying. I think the word, too, is be realistic.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
I think part of it, too, just real quick on your anecdote there is, particularly senior leadership or management that's making these purchases needs to manage expectations. Or the agency or the consultant needs to tell these people, here's what you should expect.
Right.
And here's what you need to be able to do. And we don't do that often enough, so people have unrealistic expectations based on their own business needs, and we fail them when we do that.
Yeah. And I guess one last thing, too, just to say that if I didn't say this earlier or you didn't infer this from what I was talking about, listeners, the co-working community, one last thing, you're in a community, and what's great is you can kind of vet a lot of the people you're in there. Like, so if Alex Greenwood is in the office or next to you here at iWorks, well, he's a PR guy, and he seems like a decent person. You know, he keeps a tidy office. He gives me good advice. He doesn't. He cleans up after himself around the coffee machine. You're meeting people, right? Have you seen a little bit of that happen where people work together?
That never fails to warm our hearts where we see businesses that are here. In fact, people who have never been in any of the iWorks facilities, a brief sort of visual is that all of our offices have big plate glass windows. They're open, and they're open by design. We want to encourage community and collaboration, and so. Yeah, I mean, people, you know, they meet around the coffee maker or they pass in the halls or your office is next door and you comment on a piece of art or something that's in the office. Yeah, and you develop relationships, and it certainly provides that opportunity. I worked in a high-rise, just to bring this interview full circle, I worked in a high-rise when I worked at Radio Disney, and I didn't know anybody on my floor.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell.
It's a huge building.
Yeah, we were on the 19th floor of what had to be a 34, 35 story floor, and other than the office manager, I knew nobody else in my building.
Yeah.
And that is not the case when you work at iWorks. You're going to know a lot of the people that are in here because we forced that on you.
Yeah, this has been great. Hey, Bob, how do people get a hold of you if they want a tour here or just want to talk to you about your marketing consulting?
Sure, I would say the best way to go is info@iworks.org. Okay. I monitor that email address. They can go on the website and look up the phone numbers, but I think we're at 816-588-9130. That's our main number, and anybody knows how to get a hold of me in either one of those regards, or just stop in. I'm usually in the Gladstone facility from 9 to 4:30 every single day. Obviously, you risk a chance that I'm off shoveling snow or cleaning up a bathroom or something because I have a college degree. But I encourage people just to come by. We'd love to give open tours to the space and just hear their stories as well.
Entrepreneurial titan, marketing guru, and all-around good guy, Bob Martin. Thanks for being on Mysterious Goings On, and thanks also for being on PR After Hours. We appreciate that, Bob. Thanks so much.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Mysterious Goings On listeners, for checking out that interview with Bob Martin. Special thanks to Bob. Little note here, I know the audio was a little challenging on this one. Not Bob's fault, not his studio's fault. It was all due to my portable sound rig. I've got a wonky microphone, apparently, and I need to check that thing out and see what I can do to fix that or replace it for the next time I go live and on site somewhere. But I think you can hear everything just fine. It's just not as clean as we'd hoped for, but my apologies to Bob for that as well. He's got a great story to tell, and I hope that the sound quality doesn't detract from it too much. Be checking the show notes at mgopod.com as well as in your podcast stream for links to iWorks and ways to get a hold of Bob. I can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed visiting Bob in his studio and checking out this location in Gladstone, Missouri. It's really great. I think it would be great if you live in the Kansas City, Missouri area. Even if you're not in the market for office space, you might want to check it out. It's a great place to have meetings, teach seminars. I, for example, am going to be teaching a seminar at a couple of locations. I want you to know that this is not compensated by iWorks or Bob. It's just it's a place I believe in, and Bob's a great guy, as I think you can tell from the interview. All right, check those show notes, and I'll let you know, by the way, that I have another show I do. It's called PR After Hours. It's a cocktail of PR tips and management tips for businesses. And we're going to probably include parts of, or maybe all of this interview over there as well. If that's something that interests you, PR tips, public relations tips, that kind of thing, business tips, things that could help you out, that's a different show altogether. It's a different vibe. It's very business-oriented, but feel free to check that out. There'll be a link in the show notes, and it's called PR After Hours on AnchorFM. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this. I know I enjoyed speaking with Bob, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week here on Mysterious Goings On. So until then, keep reading.
Want to know the coolest thing about St. Pete Clearwater? We'll give you a hint. It's not the beach. It's Central Ave. This is St. Pete at its funkiest, foodiest, and most fun. It's where street art meets sidewalk cafes and one-of-a-kind boutiques, where everyone is welcome, even dogs, and where the coolest craft breweries meet the city's hottest nightlife. So think outside the beach, get to know St. Pete's coolest street, and experience CentralAve.com.
Choose Empire and get free or low-cost benefits for the whole family. Pay little to nothing from baby's first checkup to filling your prescriptions, all the way to yearly dental exams. Trust Empire Health Plans for your family. Click or tap the banner to learn more. To learn more about applying for health insurance, including Medicaid, Child Health Plus, Essential Plan, and Qualified Health Plans through New York State of Health, the official health plan marketplace, visit www.nystateofhealth.ny.gov or call 1-855-355-5777.